I have a question regarding teenage kids, young people. Me being a mother of a teenage boy, I find myself very often in worries about the huge amount of computer gaming they are into. And my first question would be, is that maybe their way of coping with the topic of virtual reality, having all the technical resources we did not have in our generations? Is it maybe something they really need in order to confront the future technical developments they are going to live into? Or is it also something which is maybe sort of a danger, which we as parents have to look after, that they don't get addicted to too much, that they don't get too much away from the real reality, from the reality with sunshine and real contact with their friends and being outside in the nature? This is some dilemma I'm in every day. Okay. So I'm never really clear with myself. Am I reacting out of a fear, or is it an intuition which gets me a healthy intuition which gets me into having a quarrel with my child? Stop now, you've had enough, in my opinion.
Okay. The question for those of you just walking in late is how good or how bad is what many parents would call excessive computer gaming to children, to teenagers, particularly teenage boys. If they are constantly on the computer playing games, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's a thing of the future. There's a lot of positive in it. There's some potential for negative. It depends on the child and on how they approach that game. Most children are perfectly aware that the game's a game, and they don't confuse it with real life, for the most part. So even the games that have a lot of violence in them often aren't going to be a problem for the child if the child knows that this is a game that they're playing and this is not, a real life situation. If the child is kind of borderline, with his socialization and with, let's say mental health issues and things like that, then maybe it's a little different story. But for a normal average kid that plays too many computer games, mostly it's not a big negative. The positives are that they're learning skills that they'll need to know. These are future skills. They're going to need to know the computer and how things work and to be able to take in a lot of data, make choices. The things that are good to learn often are dependent on the game they're playing. Some games has very little good to learn in them other than maybe skill with the equipment. Other games actually force the kids to make a lot of choices and a lot of decisions, and to make them quickly, to understand what the rules of the game are and how to play within those rules, to figure out how to win and how not to win, come up with strategies, come up with plans. They play often with friends on online games, and the friends have to learn how to cooperate and work together. So there's a lot of social skills that one can get while one's not being social, on the internet. A lot of cooperative, critical thinking, making plans, executing those plans, seeing results, learning from the results, improving the plan. These are all good life skills that are useful. And computer games have a lot of those kinds of things in them. Some computer games obviously are better than others. There's a lot of sim games, like my kids got in, this was 15 years ago, they got into things like Sim Tower and Sim City, which I thought were very educational, to where you have to apply good economic reasoning and logical skills and choice making to develop a city or a big high-rise building. And how do you do that? Do you put shops in the bottom and businesses on top, or do you put residences on top, or do you mix the businesses and residences, and do you put stores in the middle, and then how many elevators do you put in? And all of these decisions they made would affect the results that they would get. They would go broke or be successful based on how well they understood the problem. So I thought all of that was very good computer games. There's other computer games that are a little dicier, like Grand Theft Auto, where you're a thug and you run over people, and you kill and you murder and you maim and you do all those sorts of things. Probably not a real wholesome game, but there's still choices that you get to make. And as a parent, I would discourage that one. But as a parent, if you try to give your teenagers, particularly your teenage boys or girls, either one, as much as you give them ultimatums and orders, you will probably get the opposite result. When you say you cannot play that game, they will go someplace else and play it. They will play it twice as long just to get even, just to spite you. So, dealing with teenagers, you have to give them guidance and you have to let them make their own choices. You can tell them about your fears and the things that worry you, and try to be as explicit and clear and just say, it's just the way I feel. So I just want to let you know how I feel, but then let them make their own choices. Tell them what you think the dangers are, but that's guidance, but it's not dictates. Dictates will create an opposite reaction. Another thing to do with your teenagers is don't criticize them. Don't be negative with them. Always be positive and always assess what they're doing with an open mind, because that will enable them to be open with you. If they're open with you, it's a whole lot better, even if you'll have to let a lot of stuff go that you don't particularly like. It's much better to have a teenager that comes home and says, hey, Mom, this is what happened to me. What do you think? Or, I've got this issue. All my friends want to go do drugs, and I'm not so sure that's a good idea. But if you tend to criticize them and tend to tell them what to do, they'll never come to you and ask you anything, because they don't want to get more criticism, and they don't want to get a lecture, and they don't want to get told what to do. So they'll just make whatever it is they do invisible to you so that you'll never know. It's better to have them know that you're there for them, not to tell them what to do, not to fuss at them, but to give them some guidance and then let them make the decisions. So those are some things to think about. But a lot of computer gaming does develop skills, not only in eye-hand coordination, but in working with data, working with computers, assessing data, choice making, and even socialization, like cooperation and that sort of thing. So they can be very positive. And because life is going to be more and more online, it's not like this is the peak of it. This is just the beginning of it. These are skills and attitudes and things that they're going to need to learn for a decade from now and 2 decades from now. Their life is just going to get more and more connected. And the idea, well, that's not the way it was when I was a kid. We didn't spend all our time. We went out and roller skated and played baseball and breathed fresh air, and we did other things. We didn't sit around and stare at a computer all evening. Well, they could be doing a lot worse than staring at a computer. There's a lot of other attractions for teenagers that are a whole lot worse than staring at a computer. You can encourage them maybe to do other things by giving them something attractive to do. We thought that, Saturday afternoon we would all go and think of something they'd really like to do and give them some other alternatives, fun things that they would like to do. Take them to one of those pinball palaces where there's a lot of things going on, and there's a skating rink, and there's laser tag, and one of the big complexes that all this stuff going on, and if they're not old enough to drive yet, take them there and let them run around for 2 hours and collect them up again. And that's more social because they go with friends. There's 5 or 6 or 7 of them. They all go hang out together and run around and spend your money. But they have a lot of fun, and they think you're the coolest mom ever that you took them there. So that's one thing that'll get them out of the house. But it'll probably get them from one game to another game. Or you can try to get them into some other kinds of activities that kids do. You know, like going camping or spelunking or other sorts of things that kind of generally are attractive to boys anyway, and I guess there's other things attractive to girls. You know, those kinds of things, get them interested in being on the local town's soccer team or whatever. So if you can help them get interested in outside things, that would help. But if you tell them they have to go get on a soccer team, you know, they won't get anything out of it, and they'll just give you pushback, and it'll be worse than if you didn't tell them anything at all. So it's not as bad as it looks like. They are learning things. There is some positive things to letting them, put in time on the games. One of the things you have to look at, are they becoming antisocial? Are they becoming withdrawn? Are they becoming disinterested in life in general? If so, then you've got a problem that you ought to investigate and see if you can see what the source is and try to find, maybe some help with that. But if they're not, if they're just rambunctious kids that still run around and scream and make noise and, get in trouble and do all the things that teenage boys do, but they spend a lot of time playing computer games, it's probably just fine. When kids are in trouble, they're sullen and quiet and withdrawn and non-responsive. And that's a problem, whether they play computer games or not. That's also a sign. Sometimes they're taking drugs and doing other things like that that are very harmful. So as long as they're rambunctious and still laugh and pick on each other and start fights and, make messes and do all the things that boys do, then they're probably all right.
So you think I shouldn't be too restrictive?
No, you can be a little restrictive of what they get. Like the Grand Theft Auto is like my best bad example. You might say, well, I'd rather you didn't play that. That's really an ugly game, and it's not something I think is good. Find some other game. There's other games. What other game would you like? And, if you're willing to buy them another game, they'd probably forgo that one. You say, well, listen, what's your second choice? What else would you like? I'll buy it for you. They might let that go and wouldn't be annoyed with you because you tried to tell them what to do. You're just not cooperating with what they want. Parents are supposed to do that. But you have to do it in a gentle way without instructing them, but with helping them. So be a little careful about what it is they do. There's some games out there that are obviously adult only. There's some games out there that are pretty unwholesome and unpleasant. And you want to know what they are. When they say, Mom, I'm getting a new game, or I'm going to do this, or you can say, well, what kind of game are you playing? And it usually says right up in the corner what they're playing. And they tell you, go look it up. Go to the internet, look up that game, find out what it's about. And if it's really what you think is a really ugly game, then it might be a good idea to try to entice them away from that. You can just be honest with them and say, I think that's a really ugly game and it's not good, but I'll buy you another game. What would you like? That sort of thing they'd be so surprised that you were going to buy them a game. They might be willing to let the other one go. Say, well, just don't play that anymore. So if you tend to work with them, they'll tend to work with you. If you tend to bully them, they'll tend to give you the stiff arm and push you away and won't communicate with you.
Hi, Tom. Can you help us better understand our individual consciousness system architecture specifically towards understanding how and where our consciousnesses actually exist and where they are actually computed, or the compute space that they reside in.
I probably won't shed much light on that for you. Remember, we're talking about metaphors here. We're not talking about actualities. We're talking just conceptually. So to break it out in more detail is probably to push the metaphor further than it deserves. You know, metaphors only work at the kind of the level they're designed for. As an example that I'd like to use is, you know, here's a metaphor. Her eyes were as beautiful as the deep blue sea. Okay? And that metaphor, everybody kind of knows what that is. She had these deep blue eyes and, you know, it was really very attractive, right? That's what it means. But we can take that metaphor too far. We can say, which sea? How deep was it? What time of day was it? Because the blueness of the sea depends on a lot of things. What about if there was an algae bloom? You know, what would that do to her eyes? And we can take all of this detail digging down into that metaphor, and we just lose it, right? Because that's not what it's about. The metaphor has to stay up at that top level. The metaphor is that I make up these things, and I make them up because they are functions of consciousness. The consciousness system. See, I get to it from the top down. So I find out for myself that it's all one big system, and it's an information system, and it has to work somehow. So I start at the beginning, and I start the evolution of consciousness, and I find these things that it has to do. One of the things it has to do is it has to produce us, individuated units of consciousness, because here we are. So obviously, you know, it had to produce us. And obviously, the system needs an executive, you know, needs an operating system. It needs the executive part that orders and constrains and makes up the rules and creates virtual realities and things like that. So then there's that part. So I call that part the LCS, Larger Conscious System. I call us the IUOCs, and we are just a part of the system. Now, if we want to look at architecture, we probably need to think in terms of computer science and parsimony. In other words, what is the most efficient way to program a thing like that? Well, you could break it up into pieces, and you can say, okay, the IUOCs are all little individual chunks of consciousness. Each one has memory, processing, its purpose, you know, its own history of what it's done and so on. So it's got all these things, and it's operating within that subspace. So cut off a partition and let that run, you know, like a little emulated computer of its own. And then you can have a whole bunch of these. So then you can have all these little emulated computers called IUOCs that are running in the bigger computer. Or you can have the idea that it's just this one big thing, and it is broken its processing down into pieces that are IUOCs. Now you just have kind of a parallel processing thing that's going on, and it's not so much individuated units, it's just one thing keeping track of a whole bunch of games and interactions that are going on. So any of those things could work. I have no idea what the architecture really is like. I just make up the metaphors for the functions that have to take place. You need the top-end function on top to make the choices, the big decisions. You need the interactive, and I can tell why you need those. Why do you need the IUOCs? You know, well, you've probably heard me talk about that. You know, that's something that it increases the decision space. All the potentiality of the choices, it can grow immensely when you get a bunch of IUOCs in the mix. So that's why you need them. But exactly how they're implemented, I think that's taking the metaphor past the point where it really works. Now, if you get down to that level, I think you are tricking yourself into thinking you know a whole lot more about what's going on than you really do. I don't feel comfortable digging it down that deep, so I just make the metaphor at the functional level and the why of the architecture down below that, you know, it's however it is. I'm not a computer scientist or whatever. I've spent plenty of years programming, but I don't really have the big architectural idea. You may have better ideas of that, you know, than I do, or somebody who really works in computer science and architectures may think, well, the most efficient way to do that is this. And if it's the most efficient way, clearly, then that's probably the way it's done. The system tends to take the most efficient processes. So that's about the only tool you can use to decide how it does things. If one way is obviously more efficient than another, that's the way it's probably done. But there may be ways that we haven't even thought of yet. It's not like computer science is a dead science and nothing else will be discovered. You know, there may be lots and lots of things that we haven't even thought of yet. So that's why I think trying to dig deeper is probably going past at least my level of expertise on the subject. So don't know about the architecture. I stop at the metaphor level, kind of at the top end. How that all goes together, how all those data flows work. Is there really a TBC, the big computer, like I say in my book, that just does N division? These are all metaphors. Or is it all just pieces of one big computer that is running a lot of little subsets of programs? You know, computers run hundreds of programs simultaneously, and maybe all the IUOCs is just one of those programs that interacts with other programs. It's all metaphorical. Yeah. So whatever's most efficient, that's the way it's being done, but I don't know what's most efficient. Yeah, wasn't much help, was it? It's the best I can do, though.
Yeah. I have a question about gravitation. I collected quite a lot of information about it, but I'm not satisfied with my conclusion. And not long ago, I heard a mystic say, if time makes a curve, there's gravitation. Do you have an idea about that?
I don't know exactly what that means, time making a curve, but the gravitation, from a physics viewpoint, is mostly in the general relativity theory. That's kind of our gravitational theory. And you have to look at general relativity as just a different model. See, we had another model before that. We had a Newtonian model of gravitation. That was a real simple model. You had a mass here, m1, you had a mass here, m2, and the force between these two is a constant m1 times m2 divided by the square of the distance between their centers. That was gravitational theory. All masses attract each other. Why? They just do, right? There is no reason why. Absolutely no reason why, they just do. That's the way it is. Okay, when physicists don't know things like that, you know, what is gravitation? Why does it work? They not only don't know that, but they don't know any of the fundamentals that make up physics. Ask a physicist, where does time come from? Time's pretty fundamental. Where does space come from? You know, where does charge come from? Where does spin come from? Well, those are the basic things. Where does gravity come from? Those are the basic things that everything else is built on. You know, all the rest of physics is built up out of those things, and physicists have no idea where any of them come from or why any of them are like that. That is a signature of a virtual reality. Where do they come from? They're part of the rule set. There's a rule set that generates the virtual reality, and that they come from the rule set. That's where they come from. That's why there's gravity. That's why those masses attract each other, because that's what rule set says it works. Now, general relativity took that and changed it into a, should we call it a geometric model. So then they had masses deform space. And if you had a big mass, it's like you had a heavy weight on a trampoline. You put a heavy cannonball on a trampoline, the trampoline all kind of sucks down because the weight pulls the trampoline down, and anything that gets too close to that rolls down into the hole. So now that's a geometric model of gravity. So the reason that there's gravity isn't because two masses attract, it's because things roll down the hill of curved space. See? They get in that curved space, and, they run right into it. So it's the curvature of space creates gravity. Well, that's just another model. That's not an answer of what is gravity. That's just taking one model and replacing it with a different model. Neither model has a clue why that should be that way. So it doesn't really tell you the answer. It just takes the model and it basically put it in a form that it could do better physics. It could answer more questions. The G m1 m2 over r squared was just very limited. Didn't tell you a whole lot other than just that. Whereas this other model tells you more. It's a model that you can get more out of it, get more answers out of it. So it's considered a better model because it's better answers. So general relativity completely ran over the GMM over r squared. But still, there's no rationale to what gravity is or where it comes from. Because physicists, they've gone through various phases, and the very first phase was everything is particles. Everything is particles. And then it went to everything is waves. And I guess I should quote, what's his name? Well, it escapes me now. Very famous physicist. His name will come to me in a minute. No? Wheeler. Yeah, Wheeler. And Wheeler said that when I began my career, I thought that everything was particles. And then I realized, partly because of quantum mechanics, that that wasn't right. There are no particles. Particles are part of a measurement process. And then I realized everything was waves. And then I realized there are no waves. Waves are just another mathematical metaphor that helps you calculate things. And lastly, says I realized it was all information. Yeah, that was Archibald Wheeler, John Archibald Wheeler. And that was his last thing, that it was all information. Matter of fact, Wheeler was the guy who coined the term it from bit, it being the universe, everything from bits being information. Probably one of the earliest people who thought that this was an information-based reality was John Wheeler. And John Wheeler was a very big gun in the physics community. He wasn't just somebody nobody ever heard of. He was probably one of the best, most creative, and most prolific physicists in the last 100 years, although he's not that well known. Anyway, so what about gravity? Gravity is just in a rule set, just like the rest of them. It's a rule. How did the rule set come about? Okay, imagine you're the larger conscious system and your individuated units of consciousness are just not growing up very well because they don't have many rich and important choices. Their choices have very few consequences. You need a virtual reality with tight rule sets, so there's consequences to everything, and everything interacts. Okay, so you're going to do this. Well, what you need is a reality that evolves. You can't program a reality. This reality that we have isn't programmed like World of Warcraft is programmed. Okay, here's a tree, copy, paste, paste, paste. You know, there's another 100 trees that make a forest, but they're all just one tree pasted. So programming it was way too much trouble. It had to evolve. So it evolves from initial conditions and a rule set. So you make up the rules. The initial conditions are a ball of plasma, very high temperature, very high pressure. You push the run button, and according to the rule set, that plasma changes itself. It expands, it cools, it makes suns, you know, and that's the Big Bang, right? It's the big digital bang. Started when the run button was hit. So it goes out a little way and then it bombs. It's unstable. Everything blows away and never comes back. Never, you know, it cools, but nothing ever comes of it. So you say, well, you know, that thing, we need to make that thing that pulls them all back together a little stronger. So it turns up gravity and says, all right, you know, run 2, hits the button, you know, does this. So you keep tweaking and tweaking and tweaking until you get a model that'll last long enough for something interesting to evolve out of it. Because it's looking for something to evolve that makes interesting enough choices that its individual units of consciousness can log on to play those choices. So you end up with lots of these little, you know, they're called what? Cosmic constants and you know, gravitational constant. There's this bunch of constants that come together to call something I think physicists call the anthropomorphic principle. And that is that if any one of these half dozen constants, if you changed any one of them, even in the 10th decimal place, the universe would have collapsed a long time ago. It wouldn't be stable. The whole thing would just disappear and wouldn't even be here. So the physicists looked at that and they call it the anthropic principle because it looks like this universe was designed just for us. Well, it was designed just for us. And the reason why you have all these constants that have to be perfectly balanced to the 15th or 20th decimal place is because they went from run 1 to run 2 to, you know, cut number 6,820 before they got all these numbers just balanced so that this thing would last long enough to evolve things like us that make interesting choices. It still isn't going to last forever. Eventually, these suns will all explode. It'll turn into dust, and you know there won't be anything there. So it's not like it lasts forever, but it has to last long enough to produce something. And during those early stages, a lot of it can take real big steps in time and do a lot of statistics and probability instead of running details. So you can leap through time pretty quickly in the beginning, slow down when you get something more interesting. Anyway, that's the way this virtual reality was created. So the anthropic principle kind of says, yeah, that makes sense. The fact that the Big Bang doesn't have a source, where'd that ball of plasma come from? Everything has a physical cause. What's the physical cause of that ball of plasma? Because the physical universe didn't exist yet. It was a derivative of that, you see. So the physicists are stuck there. They've got this magical ball of plasma that came out of nothing. Sounds pretty mystical, but that's what, physics, they have mystical assumptions at the base of many of the branches of physics. So, even time and space and spin and gravity, all those are kind of mystical things too. It's another another signature, if you will, of a virtual reality. Virtual realities just start. Because they start when the run buttons hit. So if you're an elf in World of Warcraft and you want to say, well, when did this World of Warcraft start and how did it start? You go right back to the millisecond that the run button was hit and the thing started computing and there it was, World of Warcraft. It was there. And before that, there was nothing. Ooh, mystical, It's the nature of a virtual reality that just starts. It's also the nature that if it has to evolve, there's going to be a lot of constants and things that have to be balanced just right to make that thing stable. So that's kind of the thing about gravity and physics.
So time and gravity is interrelated.
Time, yeah.
They are part of the rule set.
That's it. You see, it's not like you can say, yeah, well, how did it get in the rule set? Well, it got there by this evolutionary process of cut and try till you got something that worked. It just evolved. You know, evolution is a process fractal. It just keeps getting more and more sophisticated and more complex as it cycles through its iterations. So that's where gravity comes from. It's a rule set.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. See, that answers a whole lot of things. You know, where's time come from and charge and all of that?
Right.
You got them all, right?
But how to overcome it? So consciousness.
How to what?
How to overcome that? How to overcome gravity? How to overcome time? How to manipulate it?
Yeah, well, we do manipulate. We don't manipulate time so much, but we manipulate as much as we can here, as much as the rule set allows us. But so far, we've had no way that the rule set allows us to turn off gravity, except in Hollywood films and things, but nothing real, you know? So that rule set may not allow that. That may just be there. Now, let's say we get to a point where we are all grown up and we're all beings of love and we all have great, well-developed consciousness and so on. Maybe everything will be able to levitate, because we can do that with our minds. We can maybe manipulate that rule set with consciousness. If our intention modifies future probability, we just may have a future probability where things float up in the air, you see, but not now.
Yeah, but I like the idea.
Yeah, but not now.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that it can't happen sometime, because this is a virtual reality.
Yeah,
anything can happen in a virtual reality. My son played Age of Empires when he was a kid, computer game, and he found a cheat code that would allow him to manifest a Mercedes-Benz with a rocket launcher in the back seat, a nuclear rocket launcher. And he could blow up all the people who were beating him and win the game in an instant. And there he was on that map, in that virtual reality, you know, with its mountains and its trees and its streams, and he's driving this Mercedes-Benz around in the map. And there's these little Stone Age people, you know, picking things with axes, and he drives by in his Mercedes-Benz. And then when he gets up on a little hilltop, he points his little missile, he hits the button on the dashboard, and the missile goes up, and he's the winner of the game. Yeah. So virtual realities, you know, have almost no limit in what can happen. If it helps the system work its purpose, which is us growing up, then the virtual reality can do whatever it needs to do to support that. So if it gets to the point that on our growth path is to fly around and, you know, levitate things, if that is part of our purpose, works into that, then that can happen. If that's not part of our purpose, is all that does is make us, you know, big egotistical, look what I can do, Mom, you know, no hands, I can float, you know, and it builds up egos instead, then probably never happen. So it depends on how we grow up. The things we're able to do have a lot to do with who and what we are. Right now, we're stuck where we are right now because this is who we are right now. So yes, things can change rather dramatically.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Hello, Tom. I'm sitting over here.
Oh,
sorry, I've just beamed myself down again.
Okay.
Thank you for being here. I just want to do a little bit of background first to frame the question, if everyone's kind enough to accept that. Okay. I landed in a situation that right from the get-go, I've been aware, even from when I was a 5-year-old or a 4-year-old, that the face I was looking at in the mirror wasn't actually mine. I was just going through another experience. And I knew from that age that it was going to be quite a tough one. And I had an experience of being drawn into this reality even before I existed in it and knew that I already had a plan. I was aware that my focus here was to be kind. And I was in a situation, an environment where kindness didn't exist. but I still had this overwhelming focus and intention of being kind, no matter what. Over the years, the isolation has been useful to me, being in whatever situation, life-threatening situations, life-threatening illnesses, where I've somehow survived against all the odds and against all medical beliefs, which I don't buy into, and I'm still here. The isolation has served me very well, but I'm sure I'm not the only person where we get to a point where it starts to become problematic as we get to later stages in life. I'm well into my 7th decade now, and I'm finding, oh, really? Do I not get the option to press a delete button at some point because it's getting a bit of a bore? And I don't mean to be facetious in that. When I got hold of your work, I was introduced to it, and I've done a lot of work over the years. 4 weeks ago, on the 14th of February, it totally resonated, and until I started just listening to your stuff day and night, 24/7, increased the data on my phone, had to get unlimited internet. And I'm still listening to it, it's still on there, so, you know, I'm quite well acquainted so far, but nothing like enough. A lot of it I don't have to believe or check out. I've had those experiences, which mainly I keep to myself because it's easy to see someone as a little bit out there, especially as a woman of a certain age. A lot of us are seen as nut jobs anyway. But I'm the patron saint of nut jobs. I don't really care for that. And I don't really care what people think in that matter, because the truth is the truth, and I don't need to discuss it or convince anybody of anything. The running alongside of this, there's been a few times in my life when I've been completely aware that I actually live in other realities, and I'm not visiting them. I have a life in them. I know the people in them, I've grown up with them, they know me. So it's different from when I'm just visiting a reality and I'm an observer and I'm not engaged in it. But there are a couple of others, or I visited the same one more than once, or I seem to be the version of me that I am now, but having a slightly different kind of life. It's not that much different, but it is different. And so the question that I wanted to ask with that bit of a background is, what advice could you give me from your experience of whether to really continue in an existence or press the delete button if it gets a bit meaningless or gets to a point where it's really tough to keep finding the reasons to go on, even with all these kind of the paranormal experiences are not paranormal, so I'm not really, oh yes, I want to stay around, so I want to go flying at night. I must admit that your description of a virtual reality has made total sense, because I became aware about 20 years ago on the London Underground. I thought, oh my God, we're in some kind of reality here, that it's a system. And it's not just the underground, it's outside as well. We're in some kind of a system. And when I viewed my hands on the steering wheel of my car, I realised I'm being played. And it's finding some kind of purpose with isolation, because we're not designed to be isolated. So if I've come here today and you're saying, oh no, it doesn't happen to anyone else, only you, that will be really creepy. And I don't think that's going to be what you'll say.
No. Well, the question of, when is enough enough?
Yes.
And when is it time to leave? Well, that's only, of course, an answer that you can make, but I'll give you some things to think about along that line. You can find purpose often in being helpful to others. There's a lot of people here who do not have your insights. There's a lot of people here who don't have your experience. And you say you're isolated, but that's probably part of the reason that you don't find the purpose. We find purpose in each other. We find purpose in relationship. If we don't have relationship, if we don't have connections to other people, then we find it hard to find purpose. It's very difficult to find purpose there. Purpose is mostly found in the context of relationship here. Now, you can find purpose without of it in the sense that you can say, well, I've got, my health will last for another 10 years at least, or another 20 years, and I'm going to try to learn as much as I can. I'm going to try to get rid of my fear. I'm going to try to get rid of my ego. I'm going to try to evolve the quality of my consciousness, because every bit that I do, every bit that I succeed in that is just something I don't have to do later. You see, so in that way, you don't want to throw time away when you're at a point where you understand things well enough that you can really make a lot of progress, because you understand the game and how it's played and what the purpose is. It takes most people 50 years to get to that point where they even have an inkling of they're in a game, much less what the purpose is. Most people spend most of their life wandering around clueless in the playing field and don't know what game's going on. Well, you do. So at this point, you could work on fear, work on getting rid of that ego, work on beliefs, and make a lot of progress in developing the quality of your consciousness, which is what it's all about. And if you do that here, next time you come back in at a little higher level because what you did here. So why throw away time as long as you're healthy and fit, as long as you can function, as long as you can evolve yourself? So that would be one reason. But I would urge you to find relationship, to find connections to other people, to go out of your way to connect with people in some way. Now, as you have these experiences and as you grow up, it is, as they say, sometimes lonely at the top. Not that any of us are really at the top, but as you evolve, there's fewer and fewer people around you who you can talk to and explain things and talk about your experiences, because they just don't understand what you're trying to say. And if you do talk about it, they'll just think you're nuts. So there's fewer people, but it's not that there are no people. You come to an event like this and you've got, 80 people that are all on this same track. All would find some of the experience that you have valuable. There are people out there, but you have to work a little harder to find them. They're not just living next door or where you work. You'll have to go out of your way to find them. But there are people out there, and people who you can share with, you can help, you can encourage, you can do things with. And if you have that relationship, purpose will just come out of the woodwork all by itself. There'll be reasons, because good relationship is wonderful. It gives a lot. Interacting, connecting with people. But to do that, you have to be vulnerable. You have to open yourself up. You have to trust. And if these are fears, then they're hard to do. But now there's an opportunity to grow up to get rid of those fears. Getting rid of the fear is much better than just opting out because it's a drag. Partly it's a drag because you've let it become a drag. You haven't gone out and made the effort to either deal with the things you need to deal with or to make connections with other people. You've just kind of let it get in a rut that is no longer too interesting or too exciting. So I'd say you can probably find that interest and that excitement is still there. And I think it always will be still there. I don't think it's something that goes away when you lived over 7 decades. I'm 74, and life is a blast. There's just lots of fun things going on all the time. And I expect I'll still think that way another decade or two from now. So I'd say rethink it. Rethink where you are and what you're doing. And maybe you can re-energize what you're doing, at least to improve yourself, and make a valuable use of this time now where you've figured a lot of things out. It's not the time to quit. This is the time to make more progress. You can make more progress in the next 5 years than you were probably able to make in the first 50, just because you really understand a bigger picture now. You know, the more you know about playing the game, the better you are at playing it. So I would encourage you to continue on. Create that meaning. Meaning doesn't just happen to your life. Meaning is something you create in your life, but it takes effort.
Thank you, Tom. I've always appreciated a kick up the butt when I've needed one. But that was the most elegant so far. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tom, we have a couple of questions, just one question for right now. From the audience, from before the break. Music seems to be processed on a very fundamental level of consciousness. How does it work, or what kind of relationship do we have to music?
Well, music makes a connection to us at the emotional level. And everybody has their own connection to that music, which is why there's so many different kinds of music. Consciousness is, what do we say, resonates with music. Music speaks to you in ways that are totally non-intellectual. So it's very difficult to give you an intellectual reason of why we like music, because the reason we like music isn't intellectual at all. It's down below that. It's at the being level. So music is an expression of us. It's an expression of who we are and what we are, and those sounds can make us happy or make us sad or paint a picture. Whatever they do, we make our own interpretation of it, and we get a lot of enjoyment and pleasure out of it, but it's not an intellectual process, so it doesn't have an intellectual answer. It's just a part of us as consciousness. It's a mode of expression, just like feeling. So its rhythm goes in there too with the music. So I don't have an intellectual answer as to just what that connection is, what music does, because it doesn't operate at that level. It operates strictly at the intuitive level, the emotional level. Yeah, that's why people who appreciate music don't appreciate, well, they do appreciate, but the main thing that they appreciate isn't the skill of the musician. You know, how fast can he play notes on the piano? Wow, look at that, 500 notes a second, you know, I mean, isn't that amazing? Wow, that's really great, I enjoy this. That's not what people do when they enjoy music. It's what the music speaks to them, you know, how it makes them feel. It's all in the feeling space. I mean, we appreciate fine technique and fine skill, but that's not where the pleasure is. That's an intellectual appreciation. Music appreciation is an intellectual. We appreciate the musicians, but we love the music. Okay. Another one?
Okay. I'm on. I've gone through your first book and half the second book. That's as far as I got.
Well, that's good. A lot of
Yeah,
people don't get that far.
No. And in the second book, a couple of times you write about helpers, something that assists us. And I haven't found anything more about it. And I would love to hear you know, if you talk some more about that.
Helpers, sometimes called guides, sometimes by the more religious people called angels, sometimes called aliens, you know, it's hard to say. People make up all kinds of metaphors. They are nothing more than a personal interface with a larger conscious system. So you're a part of this system. You know, it goes back to what's the architecture, you know, between the system and the IUOCs and so on. I think of it as just all one thing. And in this one thing has a purpose. This one thing wants to lower its entropy, wants to become love. That's because it's either evolve or de-evolve. You evolve, that's becoming love. De-evolve, that's becoming fear. And eventually you de-evolve enough, that's becoming dead, non-existent. All your bits are random. Okay, so the thing wants to survive. And the only way you can survive is to continue to work on it. As soon as you quit working on it, you start to slide backwards. So we have all these individuated units of consciousness out there, and they don't know what they're doing. They're really lost for the most part. They don't understand. So the system allows you, as an individuated unit of consciousness, to open up a direct interface with it, to answer your questions, give you encouragement, pat you on the back, whatever. Give you a friend, give you information. And many people call those guides because they give you guidance sometime. And you don't have to have just one. You can have others if you like. The interfaces often have personality. They have sense of humor. They interact with you as a being, as another being sort of like you but different, from a different space. And all you have to do to have one is just to have an intent for one and a need for one. If you're open to that sort of thing, and you can learn from it and interact that way, in other words, you can send and receive. The only way you do this is to get out of your intellect, get down in that zone in the intuitive level, and then you make the connection there, not so much in the intellect. You feel like it's in your intellect, but if you're just in your intellect, it doesn't seem to work. It feels sterile, and you're not really sure that you're really talking to somebody. If it's at the being level, you feel like you are talking to somebody. You have a connection with them. But it's there, and you get help from it. So that's the help that's available, and it's available to anyone to help them grow up, just to console them sometimes if things are not so good. Young children have that connection with their non-physical friends they play with when they're lonely. They have non-physical friends. It's just an interface with the computer, and it's there to help us succeed, because as we succeed, the system succeeds because we're a part of it. So we lower our entropy, and because we're part of the system, the whole system's entropy is lowered because we lowered ours and we're a part of the system. So we are one of the system's ways of surviving, of going forward, of evolving, of staying alive, is us lowering our entropy. So it has its self-interest to help us out. That's why we get the synchronicities. Somebody back here asked about synchronicities. Why does the system want to do things that help us see a bigger picture? Why does the system want to give us, things that wake us up? Because as we succeed, it succeeds. So it's got a vested interest in our success. So do you have guides?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
On and off. So I was.
As you need
curious.
them. When you don't need them, then they're just whatever. So it's not like there's this, these little beings that fly around just waiting for you to ask them a question. That wouldn't be very efficient. It's just your interface with the system. So that's what it is. And it can be immensely helpful and immensely reassuring. I've had it pretty much all my life. And the beings that I interacted with that came and got me out of body when I'm like 5 years old, 6 years old, they're still my best friends now. So all of this time, there's still the same connection. Although I don't interact with them all the time, but when there's a need or whatever, they've always been around. I probably was in my 20s before I realized that everybody didn't have that. It's just the way life was. Sure, I got these people and they tell me things that are always helpful. Never have been told something that was not helpful or that was wrong or that got me into trouble or had me doing the wrong thing. Always was helpful. Never would tell me what to do. Never would give me any direct advice, but would always give me information and understanding.
I have one more sort of follow-up question, and that is, as we are trying to evolve and get lower entropy, is there some sort of scale on our souls or whatever to show where we are on the track?
Two answers to that. One is that there is a device that you have inside you that's a very good measure of where you are, whether you're successful or not, and that's called your emotions. If your emotions are dominantly happy, positive, joyful, fulfilled, everything's kind of great and good, smiley, if that's the big part of your emotions, then you're doing very well. If your relationships are good and rewarding, you're doing very well. If, on the other hand, your emotions tend to be, unhappy, complaining, oh, woe is me, nothing goes right, and this, and these people, and those guys are ripping me off, and these people are doing that, and the plumbing doesn't work, and I can't get the plumber to come out because he's such a, whatever. And if your whole life is full of this negative stuff, then you're not doing so good. You have a long way to go. You're not dealing with life. You're fighting it. You're struggling against events. Instead of going with the flow, you're swimming upstream. And the problem with that is it just makes everything harder and harder and harder. So look at your feelings. Look at everything you felt in the last week. How much of it was positive and happy and full of joy? And how much of it was complaining and unhappy and, Susie did that and Harry did that, and could you believe they said that about me? They don't like my dog. All the things that just, constantly that aren't the way you want them to be. If that's the focus of your life, then that means you have a lot of ego and belief and fears, and you need to work on that. So your emotions are a really good sign of how you're doing. Really good measure. And as far as comparing yourself to others to see whether I'm worse or better than, him or her or something like that, that's nothing but pure ego. That has no value whatsoever. But knowing in yourself of, how well you're doing, just how do you feel? Do you feel good? Do you feel happy? Do you feel positive? Or do you feel like complaining?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Tom.
Who's talking? Okay.
Right
Yeah,
here.
if you don't stand up, I have these bright lights in my face, so everybody out there is just a little hard to see.
I was wondering about your experience. If you ever had an experience like in the movie Avatar, like that you could be with your consciousness in another being, living in another being.
What was that last word?
Do you understand? Like if you ever had similar experience, like in the movie Avatar,
Yeah.
like that guy in a wheelchair,
Yeah.
he could transfer his consciousness into that blue guy.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever had anything like that? Or
Yeah,
anybody here?
Yeah, I have had similar experiences, but not just like that. There's a few things you can do with consciousness that are fun. They're fun and they're instructive, and I learned a lot. I've been to reality frames where you can do most reality frames, almost any reality frame that you can get to, you have an option of one, just hanging out and listening to what everybody says. In other words, you get all the dialogue and all the feelings and of all the people. So then you're like a voyeur, the fly on the wall that gets to see what's going on, and you can communicate with individuals that way and talk to them. Or you can actually go into the game, get a body there, and walk around and interact with them physically. So you have that choice. Well, everybody doesn't have that choice, but you can get that choice.
Does it feel the same? Like
Yeah.
the same reality? Like the same?
Yeah, you can go, let's say, a different reality system.
Like you have feelings in your, like in the body?
Oh, yeah,
body.
you get a body, and you go there, and you've got a body just
you
like
smell,
anybody
you
else.
hear everything?
Yeah, so, and entities can do that here. Other entities can come here, take on a body, and walk around and interact, and shake our hand, and, do those sorts of things. But there's a lot of rules that go along with that. When I have to go get in some other reality with a body in that reality, I have to have a lot of credit with the larger conscious system. I have to have a couple of gold stars by my name that says I can get that access, because the system that is producing that virtual reality has to actually put me in the data stream for all the other people. So it's not something I can force my way in. I have to get permission and go through the system to do that. And if you don't obey the rules and you make a fuss and you create a stir, or you do something that creates a discontinuity in that reality, all those gold stars turn into black stars, and you won't be able to go anymore because you didn't do it right. So you have to be very careful. So no, we don't have people come in here and become mass murderers and kill a lot of people and wink out to another reality. That sort of thing is not allowed. They're not even allowed to make a disturbance. They're not allowed to do anything that would let anybody think that they were anything other than belonged here and have been here all along. So you have to keep a very low profile. So that is a possible thing to do. It's not exactly like the avatar, but then you are not in anybody's head. You have a body, and you can interact there with the locals. It's usually doesn't last a long time. You usually go, maybe spend a couple of days or maybe a couple of hours, interact just to see how other realities evolve and what they're like and what the people are like. Language is never a problem.
Are you at the same time aware of your body, of your own body, like this one? Mm-hmm. Are you at the same time aware?
Yeah,
of
I'm here too.
Of this body?
Yeah, this body doesn't disappear. This body's still there. When I do that sort of thing, I'm generally not walking in the park. That'd be one where I'd probably be lying down someplace. It takes a little more focus. But yeah, this body is still here, doing whatever it does. I just happen to also be there doing that. And I find that I can parallel process 3 realities pretty easily. 4 are a little iffy. 5 have holes in them. When you parallel process, your time shared across all of them. So like if you're in 2 realities, you could be 50% in this reality, 50% in that one, or 75% in this one, 25% in that one. But the sum has to equal 100% of your attention. 100% of your awareness can be spread over multiple reality frames. But that means the more frames you get, the thinner and thinner it gets. So if you've got 5 realities, then you can't be more than 20% if you're in all of them at once. But you could be in, I guess, 95%, and then 1%, 1%, that sort of thing. But being in a reality at 1% just isn't useful. So you can parallel process in multiple realities. Just practice to do that. So it's not like Avatar, but it's some kind of a similar thing. Now you can do here, you can get into somebody else's head and you can see through their eyes, you can feel their feelings, you can kind of see what their reality's like. But you usually only do that for a few seconds or a few minutes, just so that you have a better understanding of how you can help them, what you can do, where really are they, what do they need, and how can you help. In order to do that, you need to understand what their reality looks like. And then you actually the old Vulcan mind meld, sort of thing, and you feel their feelings. You taste what they eat, you hear what they hear, you feel what they feel. But that doesn't last very long. It's just to get an information, be helpful. If you do that with an idea that you're not trying to be helpful, you're trying to manipulate, it will backfire on you, and again, you'll lose your hall pass, and you'll be demoted, and you won't be allowed to do those sorts of things.
One more thing about transplantation or blood transfusions. If you get a blood transfusion or another organ from somebody else, does it change how you view life or how you view reality?
Yeah, it can give you a little bit of a change. It can, because you'll take on, you will have a little bit of the characteristics of where that came from. But generally, for most people, that gets overpowered and overwhelmed and eventually goes away. It's not something that's permanent for most people. It would depend on the situation. It could be stronger or less, but to some typically lesser extent, you will have some part of that person's definition, that person's characteristics, if you will. But, what are the characteristics of somebody else's liver? It's not going to affect you very much. And in some months, that effect goes away. It gets very, very small. It kind of, unless you reject the organ, you welcome it, then it all becomes a part of you as well. But yeah, there is some part that transfers with the transplant.
One little thing, when the consciousness evolves, do avatars evolve as well?
When the consciousness evolves?
Evolves.
Yeah, evolves. What was the rest of it?
Do avatars evolve also? Do they become more resilient or?
Do our tasks evolve as well?
No. Avatars, like the body.
Oh, yes.
Will it become more resistant, tougher?
Absolutely.
More beautiful?
Yeah, the mind leads, the body follows. As we evolve, our body evolves, our body changes to enable what our consciousness now is able to do. So that's the case. Good example of that is moral sheep. They found that sheep were making moral choices, and the moral choice was that a mother sheep would nurse or give milk to a lamb that was not her own. So there'd be another lamb, the mother dies, the lamb has no source of food, so some other mother sheep would take that lamb in and let them suck her as well, as their own lambs. And the biologists thought that was very strange behavior, because lambs aren't supposed to behave that way. They're just animals. Well, so are we, but biologists often don't think that way. And they take the sheep and look at the sheep's brain. That's what happens when you're a really nice sheep. Somebody cuts you open and looks at your brain. And they found this little lobe on the sheep's brain that was in around the same place that is where we find empathy and connection and caring for people. And the conclusion was, look, the brain developed this little lobe, therefore the sheep became empathetic and caring. It worked just the opposite. The sheep evolved, grew up, became empathetic and caring, therefore the brain, in order to support that more fully, created a lobe. So that's the way it works. So yes, as we evolve, our brain and body evolve to better express us.
Well, thanks.
Okay, hi.
Hello.
I would like if you could elaborate a bit about the feeling of envy and how can we work to reduce it or get rid of it. It's kind of a complex social emotion, and I understand that you work with fear to find the fear and get rid of it, but can we work with this in other ways as well? For example, work with an intention to say, I don't want this, or I want to get rid of it. So could you elaborate on the different ways to work with this kind of feeling?
Work with fear?
Envy.
Envy.
Like
Got it.
jealous, but not jealous.
How
Envy.
to work with envy.
Yeah.
I suspect you'd work with envy the way you'd work with other fears. I don't know that would have a special way to work with it. If you have a feeling of envy, it's because you are not all you think you should be. you feel you should be more. That's probably one way of looking at envy. You know, somebody is some way or has something that you don't have but you want, so then there's envy. Usually, I guess the grass always looks greener on the other side of the fence, is what they say. You know, things always look better. You imagine it, things are better. You know, other people have it better. Often they don't. They just look that way. But to get rid of a fear, you would be aware when you feel it. If you feel yourself expressing envy, then you would immediately catch yourself and say, not good. I don't want to be like that. And then you bring up at your being level this intent. I don't want to be like that. It's my intent to outgrow that and not feel that way. And you just kind of repeat that a little bit, and then you let it go and go off and do something else. So if you do that every time you recognize that there's envy, then if you immediately stop, say, I don't want to be like that. Not, I don't want to act like that. You don't want to say that. You want to say, I don't want to be like that. And if you have that as a strong intent, that intention will modify the future, that you won't have the envy. And it eventually will go away. But it won't be quick. It's one of those things that follow like a parabolic curve. You get a little bit of success and a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit, it starts going up faster. So it's really slow in the beginning, but once it starts going away, then you can get rid of it pretty quickly.
So you don't really go to find the fear, but you can work with it in that way, as you say.
Yes, you can work with it just when you recognize it. Mm-hmm. Whenever you be aware of it, say, all right, I've got this problem with envy, and whenever I'm envious, I'm going to notice it. And when I notice it, I'm going to not be that way. I'm going to set an intent. I'm going to not follow through on what it was I was thinking or going to say. I'm just going to let that alone. Don't castigate yourself and bad me. You know, I'm having entropy. I'm having problems again. You know, don't say that. Don't be negative with yourself. Say, oh, good, I caught it. That's a good thing. Now, I don't want to be that way. I don't want to be that way. And spend a little time with that feeling, and maybe an hour or two later reinforce that with, I don't really want to be that way. And if you put some force and energy and time into that, it'll just wither and go away, and you won't have that envy anymore.
So, and if there was a fear behind it, it would...
It would dissipate all by itself. So you don't have to name the fear and go rip that fear out by the roots always. Sometimes that's a good approach, but sometimes you can work just on the feeling. But be careful not to work on, I don't want to act that way. You got to say, I don't want to be that way.
So how do you know the difference between when you can do like this and when you have to rip it up?
Depends on what works for you. I would say most people get rid of their fear in the way I just said. You know, they just catch themselves and keep instilling that intent that they don't want to be that way. That's probably the way. Now, sometimes you'll find out that your fear is associated with something more obvious, something not so subtle. So if you have envy and you don't really know why, it's probably a subtle reason. It's probably an insecurity. It's probably a feeling of inadequacy somewhere as your fear. But finding that feeling of inadequacy, it's like it has roots all over the place, and you don't know exactly where that came from. It could have come out of your culture. It could have come out of anywhere, and it's kind of hard to find those roots and rip them up. But if you find out that feeling of insecurity or inadequacy was because of the relationship you had with your mother, and she wrongly chastised you once or said something that you thought was putting you down or didn't treat you well or something, and it may not that she really did any of those things, it's just that was your interpretation of it, then that's the kind of thing you can rip out by the roots. You can go back and say, oh, I get it. My two baby sisters got a teddy bear and I didn't get one. That was the problem. I remember I felt so bad and so rejected that I went to my bedroom and cried for an hour and I was miserable ever after. You know, then you can grab that and say, well, that's ridiculous. You know, I see it now. Mom just didn't get me the teddy bear because I was 3 years older than the two younger ones, and she thought it was more appropriate for their age. And then you get it, you forgive everybody, and you're fine. So that's ripping it up by the roots. Sometimes that's hard to do. Then the other way works a lot better.
Okay, thank you.
So, the question about healing, what should be considered when it comes to healing? Do you have a few rules that are important to pay attention to? This is the first question. And the second is, can sports affect our consciousness growth?
All right, ask me that again. I'm missing a couple of the words.
Okay, the first question is, what should be considered when it comes to healing? Do you have a few rules that are important to pay attention to?
On healing?
Yeah.
How to heal others?
How to heal myself or
heal
others?
yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah, you heal yourself the same way that you heal others.
Okay.
Yeah, there's some rules
Okay.
for healing. Usually the diagnosing and the healing are two different things. If you're just practicing and wanting to learn to heal, you should start with diagnosing. Diagnose and then heal. Diagnosing is finding out what's wrong, okay? Because that gives you immediate evidence. Oh, okay, this Susie Q that you gave me her name, I'm looking at her and I see that there's a big black spot right here, you know, and then it's like, well, that's right where the heart is. So it looks like she's having heart trouble, and then you find out, is Susie actually having trouble with her heart, or is it, you know, bunions, you know, on her toes or something, and then you got it wrong. So getting evidence is important. So in the healing process, in the beginning, I encourage people to do the diagnosis and the healing together, because the diagnosis will start building confidence that you actually can get this information. It is right as you practice. The key idea here.
How to practice? Sorry.
The key idea here is to work from the being level. A few things that are important is, one, you have to get rid of the noise in your mind. If you've got all this chatter going on in your mind, that's going to make, you know, that's going to not have much effect. So your mind has to be clear. Usually you learn how to get your mind clear through meditation. Okay. Besides a clear mind, your mind has to be focused. You have to know exactly, you know, what you're trying to do. You have to stay focused on it intently. Your mind cannot be noisy, can't wander around, can't figure out what you're going to get at the grocery store and then come back and heal a little bit and then wonder about if your dog bit the postman and come back a little bit. You can't be jumping around, so the focus has to be tight. And you have to be connected in a caring way. If it's just something you're doing on a lark or something you just want to do to see if it works, it won't work nearly as well. It works best if you care. You want to heal them because it's something you can give, something you can do, and because you care about them, and healing them would be helpful to them. So if you have that kind of an empathetic connection with them, that will give your intent a lot more power.
Is that the key, the empathic level?
Keep it at the being level. Keep it keep it out of the intellect. Keep it as a feeling. You can use tools that are intellectual. In your imagination, you can draw a shape, or you can say, I want to see the health body of Susie Q. And then up comes the health body, and now I want to see the things that are wrong with Susie Q as black. Well, there's black spots on Susie Q. Now I want to turn those black spots white. Okay, that's a symbol for getting rid of the things that are wrong with Susie Q. So then you turn the black spots white, but not only white, but very white, glowing iridescent white. And then you give Susie Q light and whiteness and energy head to toe, besides working on those spots. And then you make sure that it lasts a long time. Then after that, a few hours go by, and that may take you 15 minutes. A few hours go by, and you drop in on Suzy Q. Only takes 15 seconds. Drop in, still white, brighten the white up a little bit, let it go. Do that 4 or 5 times in a day. You just keeping that intent alive and focused. That's what that's doing. So do that 4 or 5 times a day, and do this for probably no more than 2 weeks. So that's 4 or 5 times a day for 2 weeks. So it's a fair amount of effort on your part. But what that does is maximize the effect that you're going to have, particularly if you're a beginner. When you're not a beginner anymore, the whole thing can probably happen in 3 minutes, and you'll be more effective than you were in 2 weeks. But as a beginner, you need success. You need things to work. So to maximize that probability of success, every several hours, keep pushing that intent and do it for about 2 weeks, and you will be surprised how accurately you can diagnose things and how much effect you can have on people's health. And I would say this is probably the easiest thing you can do with your mind to affect matter is healing. Healing is probably the easiest of all the paranormal things to do. It's also one of the most helpful things to do. You should be aware that everybody doesn't need to be healed. Everybody doesn't want to be healed. And being ill, having problems is sometimes part of your lesson and life plan in growing up. And usually you know that when you get pushback with your healing. You turn the thing white, and in a few seconds it's black again. And then you turn it white, and then it's black again. That means they're putting it back. They have energy in that process, and then you just leave it alone and let that go. You shouldn't heal everybody. You have to heal those people that want it. Now, you could ask people, do you mind if I work on you with my mind? But that may be a little problematical if it's your mother, and she'd probably scream, and think that you were in a cult and sliding down into a dark space and get upset. So sometimes, if you're a beginner, it doesn't matter that much because you're not strong enough that you're going to run over other people's free will. If you work on somebody that's part of their plan to keep it, then they'll just put it back. So as a beginner, it's not such a big problem. What you need is just a lot of practice. Okay. Team up with somebody else. You find sick people that you know what they have. I always tell people, ask your grandmother. Your grandmother knows lots of people who are ill and sick, and she can give you names and tell you what's wrong with them because she's discussed it with them a lot. So get those, and then you give them to your partner. Your partner gets those and gives them to you, and then you diagnose the ones your partner gave you, and your partner can tell you whether you got it right or not because she's gotten all that information from her grandmother. So that's the way that works, and you just do that. If you work on it, say, an hour a week, or not an hour a week, an hour a day, 3 months, I'd be surprised if you weren't 80% effective. Okay. It's not a lot of investment. It's an easy thing to do. If you want more instruction, go to one of my, two things you can go to. You can go to the TMI intensive things that I did. They're out on YouTube, and I explain all about healing and the things to do, the things not to do, some of the techniques, some of the tools. Also, all of the workshops that I've done the last day or the last 6 hours are all dedicated to remote viewing and healing, and you have targets and other things that are already there for you to use. Okay. So you can look those up on YouTube. But those are the basics that I just gave you. Intent, focus, low noise, caring, being level, not intellect, and repetition. Keep doing it. If you have 10 people that are at the same level that you are, and you all work on the same person, you'll be 10 times as effective. It adds. Or if you work on them, 10 times instead of just once, you'll be 10 times more effective. It's additive. You're adding to the probability of them getting better. So if you change that probability a little, it doesn't immediately snap back. You change it a little, it's like that. It may drift back to the way it was naturally, but it does that slowly. So you can pump it up a little more and a little more. Every time somebody adds to it, it adds to it. That's why I have you do it for 2 weeks, and you keep pushing it with just a few seconds in between times. That keeps that probability pushing up. Okay?
Thank you. And, the second question was, can sports help us to grow in our consciousness?
Sure. Sports are good for several reasons. One, they teach you to not be so self-centered and be a good sport. If you're a good sport when you're in sports. You know, you have to learn to lose with grace, not with anger or resentment. So that's good. But the other thing you learn is to get in that being level space when you want to. Because you're not good at sports when you're intellectual. You're good at sports when you're at the being level. So when you're in that zone in sports, you know, when everything's working right, when you're able to run at full speed, leap in the air and catch the ball, when everything's just working, that's because you're in the zone and you're not thinking about it, you're just doing it. And you put yourself in that zone and you pop out of that zone. You're standing there and you're watching and the baseball players are around and you say, okay, we got 2 people, one on first, one on second. If that ball comes this way on the ground, I'm going to have to get it into home plate very fast. So you're thinking, that's the intellect. But when you have to actually go do something, you drop right out of that intellect into the being level and you act totally intuitive. And then once you got that ball, you snap right back into the intellect knowing what it is you have to do next. And then your throw is intuitive. So athletics can teach you to jump back and forth in and out of the intuitive to intellectual space. Because what your optimal is to use both your intellect and your intuition working together. Right brain, left brain. They work as a team. They throw the ball back and forth between them. Sometimes they'll work at the same time. Sometimes one is better, and sometimes the other is better. But you just let that go on as an interaction, an interplay between both hemispheres and between the intellect, and that's the optimal, not one or the other, but both. So you should be extremely right-brained and extremely left-brained, extremely intuitive and extremely intellectual all at the same time, and have them integrated into one thing. And you'll learn that some with sports, jumping back and forth.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's on? Oh, it's on. Craig, my question is about fear, which occurs or seems to be occur to randomly. So there's no obvious reason for it. Person doesn't know why she fears, or he. And what would you advise? And what's about the idea that this is installed by the rule box to prevent this person from a similar situation?
Okay, so you have a person that has fear, knows they have fear, but doesn't know why.
Yes.
And they can't find out why. Well, the biggest reason that they can't find out why is probably because they don't really want to know. Their intellect may want it to know, but fear is fear because it's scary. And to go face fear takes a lot of courage. And if you are getting by okay, often that's better to just let that go than it is to go face that fear, just because the fear is that scary. So it's hard to face fear. So that's partly people can't find it because they don't want to find it. It's too unnerving. It's too upsetting. It brings up stuff that they've been trying to push down out of sight for a long time. Bringing it back up just feels like I don't want to go there. So that's one thing. Another thing is that, like we said with Tina, you may not need to know what it is. You may just work on, how does this fear affect my life? You know, how does this fear come out? How does this fear inform my choices? That I choose things differently because of the fear. I choose, I react this way, or I react that way, or I don't do this, or I do that. What is my fear? How does it affect my life? And then whenever it starts to affect your life, catch yourself and say, I don't want to be that way. then you don't have to know what your fear is, and you can get rid of it that way. But you have to have a commitment to do that. If it's intellectual, like, well, I should get rid of this fear. This fear is a nuisance, and I ought to get rid of it. So I'll do these things, but now that's intellectual. That won't help. You have to really want to get rid of it. Otherwise, you won't make much progress. So that's how you would deal with it. It's not always necessary to know what the fear is. Sometimes they're hard to find. Fears tend to masquerade as all sorts of things, and the reason that your ego even exists is to help you ignore the fear. That's what your ego's there for. It's to whitewash that fear so it's not so scary anymore. Stuff it away, excuse it, ignore it, deny it. So it's not necessarily an easy thing to go find and face that fear. Depends on how emotionally terrifying it is. Some fears have a lot of emotion with them. And people kind of start feeling that emotion and it feels really yucky and they back away.
That's the last question.
That seems to be the last question. Thank you. You've been a wonderful audience. It's been a lot of fun. I hope you've had as good a time as I have. So till next time.